wanna see some people disagree with me. It makes up conversation. I'm making tea, but my nose only runs my nerves. They won't get any calmer. Like a box mod, baby. It'll blow up in your face. Yeah, people explode sometimes. Get out of the way.
Welcome to Spill the Tea. I'm the Chrissy.
I'm Hawk.
This is going to be a YouTube extravaganza show bigger than any that you've ever seen on the planet of Earth. You know, this show is going to involve like actual data and facts to try and present like a basis for discussion. So it'll be an examination into sociology, and sociology is... Sociology is the study of human interactions. It examines the social structures, institutions, and general sets of behaviors that build the social world around us. Today, the most devoted group of humans studying transgender culture are sociologists. These are people looking beyond the veil, researching the very social world around us that helps construct the transgender reality. We wanted to bring an evidence-based discussion, with topics chosen for their scientific value.
Just to let you know, guys, today's thing will be covering very heavy topics. We don't want anybody's feelings to get hurt, but we feel like it's important that people have this knowledge. I'm going to be the mean one.
I'm going to try and take the scholar approach and present the facts.
Good, not a cop.
Bad, not a cop.
Right on.
I want people to treat people like people. I want to fist fight people who don't treat people like people.
I want a fist fight. On today's episode, we'll be talking about Dave Chappelle and comedy that may harm the transgender community and some people's opinions. The facts that we will present will be studies based on transgender violence and the effects of bullying. Some of the material in today's show might be sensitive to a lot of viewers because we expect to have a lot of transgender viewers, but we're here for you, so reach out to us on our Discord if you have any distress. We're your family, and we love you. The whole thing is that Dave Chappelle at one point in time made damaging jokes, and people lashed out, wrote letters, and he responded with more jokes instead of an apology. So there is a lot of debate whether or not things contribute to certain social ideologies that might perpetuate the harm of a minoritized people. So that's what we'll delve into on today's episode. Thank you for joining in. This is Spill the Tea, and I'm the Chrissy. These are my guests: Bridget Denman, comedian; Sedgwick, comedian; Ms. Demure, entertainer extraordinaire. And today we're going to talk the tea about Dave Chappelle and possible things like comedy that might harm the transgender community. How is everyone today?
Well, thank you.
Like, so good.
So good. We've been hanging out, having coffee, and chatting and getting to know each other. So we have a comfortable basis. I feel like none of us really know like the story of the show or like why it is even here or why we're even here. So real quick, I'd like to thank Kemp Muhl from the band Uni, singer and songwriter and Maybelline model, and overall really cool person. Arguing with her one day on Instagram sort of triggered about some Dave Chappelle issues. Got me really thinking, and she said, challenge extended, basically. You should start a show and put your voice out there. And I said, challenge accepted. So here we are today. So thank you, Charlotte, for your support and all your love. And so let's see what happens. Bridget, how did you get into comedy?
Sure. So I am a comedian. I've been doing that for a while.
I know your start because we've known each other long enough that I think I know the moment you were like, fuck this, I'm going.
Yeah. I haven't been doing comedy for very long. So I guess I'm still an amateur. I'm a regular at Go Bananas in Cincinnati. I perform at Wiley's Comedy Club a lot. I go all over Indianapolis, a lot of the Midwest areas. So I'm doing a lot of comedy, and I mean, that's really, it for me. I have, just tonight I'm going to be on the Super Dope Comedy Fest, which you're not going to be able to come to because this is going to be done. But follow me on Instagram. It's just at Bridget Denman. That's also my Twitter or my Facebook page, Bridget Denman Comedy. and I'm sure we can probably do links or something.
We'll put that in the link down below. Reed, how'd you really get into comedy, or what's your deal?
Wow. I was in Buenos Aires, and there was a weekly English language comedy show. And when I got the money, I just moved to Argentina. I just stayed there, and I started a storytelling show. And then there was this comedy show in English, and I wasn't good. Like, I was brand new, and I still got to be on this show for a while called Gringo, which was really fun. So then once I started, I was like, oh, why didn't I do this before? And so I was like, I got to go back to the States and give it a try. So I live in Louisville. That's where I'm from. I pretty much grew up there. Awesome stuff is happening in comedy. Like Dwayne Duke, who produces the Midwest Queer Comedy Festival every year. It moves from city to city. Like, it's pretty awesome.
Wow.
And so he chose to do that in Louisville this last year, and I got to meet so many queer comics of different genders, and like all different. It was great. It was wonderful. It was so supportive and fun, and the comics were so good, and like it was a really good time. And that was really one of the first times I felt like, oh yeah, there is a gay comedy scene. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Would you say that you guys kind of exist in like a transgender or community or queer space generally, or do you kind of end up being in like a lot of typical avenues for like, heteronormativity, cisgender people, that kind of thing?
For me, we spend majority of what I would consider like practice, so like going to open mics and things like that. That's definitely mostly just heterosexuals, and more specifically heterosexual males.
Yeah.
And cisgender people.
There are trans comedians, but it's super small. It
Like
is
zero famous ones. Like,
the most famous trans comedian I can think of would be Cassie Workman, who's an Australian comedian.
okay.
So she doesn't get a lot of work here, but I've seen her videos, and her videos make it around. She's the most famous trans comedian I can think of. And I mean, nobody knows who she is. You don't know who she is.
I have no idea. Yeah, so that's sad. But that's those things that we're working on in the community. So yeah, Miss Demure's been in the scene for a while. How long have you been on the queer scene in the performance area?
Well, I started my drag career back in 1998 at 32 years old. So at that time, I was already ready to be in the homes. But and I have a cable access show, a local cable access show called Harper's Bizarre World Presents the Miss Demure Show. It is the oldest LGBTQ public access variety talk show in the USA. At one point I tried, thank you so much. At one point I tried to get my show recognized in the Guinness Book of World Records, but I didn't have any competition, so I never received the honor, but it is an honor because there's no competition, so that's how I look at it. So.
In like the local TV world, the what's it called, public access TV world.
Mm-hmm. It's
not
the
only
original
are you
social media.
Yeah, no, you're not just the longest running. Like, you're one of the only shows that really exists in that platform for what we do. We talked about a couple earlier. There's some areas where people are trying, but I don't think you have a lot of competition there, do you?
No, and I do have one spinoff for my show. It's called Queries, and it's been on since '04.
We'll put links below in the description box.
Mm-hmm. One of my directors his name was Ed Willett. He just passed away last year, and he was a Tuskegee Airman in World War II. So he was like the feather in my cap. And he was such a sweet old man. He lived in Yellow Springs, and he was such a sweetheart. He would fall asleep directing, but I loved that he was so cute.
It's kind of like, where's Anthony? Where's our director go?
Yeah.
I know there's right
I mean,
you mentioned Yellow Springs. That brings us kind of home to the topic. Dave Chappelle is also from Yellow Springs.
Mm-hmm.
So in the transgender
from
community,
DC.
he's from DC.
But he lives in.
He has a farm and lives in Yellow Springs. Yeah.
Don't ask.
What do they grow? Do they grow stuff on a farm?
I don't know what Dave Chappelle does. What the hell does Dave Chappelle do in his spare time?
What kind of farm
smoke
is
weed.
He smokes a lot of weed. He pays for a lot of cool things to go on around town. I know that he's known as sort of a community philanthropist in a way. After the mass shooting in Dayton, he did bring this big block party to the Oregon district, and they kind of sealed the whole thing off. They brought Stevie Wonder. Like, it was pretty amazing. A lot of the leading causes in a lot of studies for things like suicidal ideation and suicide attempts in trans teens are things like bullying and even simple things like name calling. And it doesn't always have to be like a physically violent act. Do we feel like comedy from someone like Dave Chappelle, who's not transgender, who doesn't understand the actual system of oppression going on in that community, is that harmful? Is that a form of bullying? And what are your personal thoughts on things?
Well,
like
first
that?
I think you have to look at the joke itself, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking about the joke itself, first of all, the whole setup to that joke is masterful, and it is a really accurate depiction of the way that the LGBT community works, right? The part about the white gay men being the ones driving the car, like that is perfect. Like, that joke is so good. And the very end of it, to me, sucked. Like, as a joke, it was like, okay. But
That's the part where he does the like the Chinese impression, or
Yeah.
the Asian impression.
yeah.
Yeah, where he conflates gender identity with, hey, let me identify as a different race or something, and he brings up that common misconception too. And the Sticks and Stones special is what we're referring to, the #1 special on Netflix right now.
And you have to think about who else, like, it's called Sticks and Stones. Like, actually, as we were watching it, I was like, okay, the first thing he jokes about is suicide, then pedophilia, then R. Kelly, then, you know, the F word, the alphabet people, like, school shootings.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, he
know,
went to
it's not
school shooting.
like he's really, like, going to, you know, go after every, like, issue in the zeitgeist. And it's tragedy, and we're laughing at it because he made parts of it funny, you know, like, I don't know. That's
I do get both sides of the spectrum, but me being African American, you know, right now I'm Ms. Demure, but as an African American male, I see the juxtaposition, because for me, I've always had a problem finding friends within my own African American community, because either I'm gay or it's because I'm a drag queen. And so what I see in Dave Chappelle, and I know that comedy, you're supposed to go up to that line, and sometimes you can cross it because it's political satire, or it's just, you know, but even in those sense, there are a lot of good comedians like Joan Rivers. She would cross that line, but she always put a spin on it, and she gave it humanity. And that's the only thing about Dave Chappelle. I think in some instances he would just show just a little bit more humanity, because he does walk in our shoes as far as him being African American, but it just seems like
What part of the special?
the whole thing about the trans. I mean, just
But like, I mean, I watched it, and he didn't really say anything negative about the trans community.
well, this
He
isn't
said,
the first time
like,
though that he's
That's
put his
true.
foot in his mouth, and
He did
it
say
just seems
something
like
on
with
a
him
previous
it's almost
special.
apples and oranges. There's a, and believe me, I've met him before.
But I mean, it just, I mean, everybody's like upset and stuff about it, but like,
I think
which
a big
part?
I think a big
Well, I
part
think-
of
What
it.
part?
I-
What part
and
upset
maybe-
you about it?
Just
Yeah.
originally, like, just the idea that, because there's other jokes. Like in the Sticks and Stones special doesn't have the worst joke that I think Dave Chappelle's told of trans people. About a month later, he was in North Carolina, I think it was, and he did, at the Charlotte Theater or something, and he did this big special to them that was not on camera and recorded. And his main joke was that the trans ban is such a dumb thing. Like, if I was Trump, I'd put them all on the front line, because when the guys on the other side get up and, you know, they rip open their chest and you got this beard and these big old breasts and stuff, like, that would F me up. And you know, basically he was saying, like, send them to the front lines, let them get slaughtered, just like, you know, America has done to marginalized peoples in the past. And it's kind of a throwback to, like, civil rights struggles, and it really gets a lot of people hot, you know.
Yeah.
So, do you think comics can be malicious? Do you think that there's an element of comedy that's exempt from?
I mean, I feel
malicious
like
intent?
the thing about it is that if he's talking about like people who are marginalized being put on the front lines, like he is of a group that has historically happened to.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's not like he doesn't understand what he's saying, but on another level, it's like using those experiences that have historically added to the racism that we exist with in this world today. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's comedy, right?
It is, but I think sometimes he's biased in that area, and when you get to that point where he's being a little too biased, then it comes across like it's personal.
I think the fear is that, like, as marginalized people, like, most things that build a negative narrative about us, even if it's small or insignificant, because I know there's lots of things that our community flips about that we all don't agree with. But I think that it's this fear that there's this overarching kind of negativity that's being built in the popular culture about trans people.
Well, that's always been there.
And that someone as important and as popular, Dave Chappelle's like the #1 show on Netflix, like, I think that's why he gets dragged into that anyway.
But there's so many white comics who do jokes that are even worse, like way worse, and show way less understanding or nuance that don't get shit for it at all, you know? And why is it that we're holding Dave Chappelle to this standard that is like...
Dave Chappelle doesn't have the same entitlement as a white comic. So for even if he feels that way to a certain extent to do that, it's just going to do more harm.
Because he's from a marginalized group, further marginalizing another group?
Yes.
I mean, I can see the argument.
It's creating a bigger avalanche. It's creating a bigger avalanche. It's like, I feel like in my life, I have to fight even twice as hard as the average person just to get on the soapbox. There's barriers within our own community. So for Dave Chappelle to do that when we're fighting in the house, outside of the house, we just don't have time for it.
Yeah, things like
he'll go
Trump's
an opening of an
trans
envelope, believe me.
You know, Trump's trans ban, him removing transgender from like all official documents. There were reasons that I was afraid at first. One of the things that was the most compelling argument to me, Charlotte from Uni kind of brought up, what if someone like Dave Chappelle mentioning our name a lot, even if it is negative and crappy, isn't that putting us in the mouths of more Americans than we've ever been? And is there anything wrong with us riding the benefit of that free publicity?
But it wasn't that bad. Like, the things he said wasn't even like off.
Not true.
Like so for the other special, when he was talking about the soldiers and stuff, that was worse. But I mean, talking specifically about sticks and stones, his joke and metaphor for driving the car was beautiful. That was so well done.
I mean, I was angry about it when I started this whole process, but I'm like, you know what? That's kind of funny.
Never felt malicious. It didn't feel like he was attacking.
He says he has gay friends and lesbian friends. He didn't mention having trans friends.
Well, he actually did thank a trans woman in the credits to the special itself. Yeah. And then she later, I guess has since ended her own life, but... Yeah.
I looked into that. I don't know if that's connected in any way.
It's probably not connected. It's just another kind of symptom of, and that's just tragic, and it happens so frequently, and it's within our power to do a lot against that, you know. And it is true, I think, that Dave Chappelle isn't out there necessarily, like, fighting for trans women. I don't see that is the case. I don't think the whole attitude... I don't get this whole trans thing. Like, we've heard it before, okay? It's boring, it's tired. That's how everybody wants to act and interact with the idea of trans people, and it does harm us. I think it would be great if everybody was more supportive and had some idea what it cost.
Because there's a huge social cost to being transgender.
People who do not like conform to the gender binary.
Well, maybe there's something to say about that, you know, saying you don't understand what being trans is. I mean, we're not very well known. We don't have very many public figures.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one thing I do with my comedy is I just talk about it. My main topic that I touch on when I'm on stage is talking about being trans and what that means for me. And I try to do it in a funny way, but I don't know. I mean, people don't understand what being trans is,
I
right?
saw a
Like, so
twinkle in
maybe
your eye,
we
but that's
need to-
something I wanted to talk about was, do you think that there's a difference between a transgender comedian doing comedy about trans people and a cisgender man
Well, obviously,
like Dave
yeah.
Chappelle? Yeah.
If you put that on anything, yeah, it's going to change it, right? Like, we could talk about race, like, you know, somebody of color talking about jokes like that versus somebody who's not of color. I mean, that, it doesn't matter if it's somebody talking about a group of people that they're not a part of. It's definitely a different dynamic.
Yeah,
Really, walking in someone's shoes changes
Yeah.
the perception.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it though, because how often do we meet people in our real life who just don't understand
Yeah.
what it's all about? And sometimes I am the first person that is openly transgender that they have ever met. I can't tell you how often I'm on stage and just the look of people's faces, like, this is a totally new topic. It's something they don't think about, and it's something that truly doesn't affect their life at all. Like, they're not trans, nobody in their family is trans, they don't have any friends who are trans, and I think we make up like less than 1% of the population. So they just don't understand, and I think that's kind of okay. I think, you know, we need to start making it knowledge, like, we need to start getting that knowledge out there, but this is an uphill battle, and, you know, we don't want people to make it more difficult. I just try to be nice in life when I meet people so that I'm that, like, first point of contact, you know?
I think that's a big point, is like a lot of people have like the preconception that we're going to be like the viral things that they've seen trans people be, like the GameStop issue. You know, I'm a woman and throwing the games around. And I think that a lot of people, you know, expect us to be a certain way. And, you know, there is this groupthink that all trans people are these things. Like even Dave Chappelle said, and then the T's in the back seat, staring out the window. I mean, I laughed at that too, because that's kind of stereotypically true, but that's the stereotype that everybody follows. So I do try to bring to the plate a little bit more of my personality to people in public. I try to tolerate as many questions as I can until people start talking about genitalia and have I had the surgery. And there's this huge conversation in the world that's mostly run by other people. So it'd be nice to be a part of the conversation and have our voice out there.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Do you think he's just trying to make a buck? Is there any consensus on, does he even care about this issue at all?
Well, that's one thing I said to you, right? I was like, he's a comedian, and as a comedian, what we do is we get on stage and we say things. And if they laugh, we'll continue to say it. So I think part of it is it totally his fault? Because he got on stage, he said it, and the entire audience laughed.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just as much on everybody who's contributing to that. But then again, I really, for the Sticks and Stones special, don't think anything about the LGBT community was too harmful. I think most of it was pretty okay.
I agree. He's had worse jokes.
For what it was. I mean,
Yeah, there wasn't
Sticks
anything
and
hateful.
Stones.
It was like,
He is marginalized, just like the whole rainbow. And sometimes we can be our worst enemy in that sense. We keep setting up barriers within our own community. There's all these sub-levels. And
So, sort of final thoughts, few minutes to wrap up. What kind of things would you offer to young trans people who are seeing things like Sticks and Stones and sitting at home and feeling depressed? What would you say to the kids who feel like that is ruining their life right now? And
it's not great, but it's also, I feel like a lot of being trans is being resilient and, you know, kind of like looking at things in a different way. And I would say to anybody out there who's trans, being trans gives you the opportunity to have a different perspective from the majority culture, and, you know, if being true to yourself makes you feel different from other people, well, being different from other people isn't a tragedy, because look how shitty people are. So
for me, I guess what I would say is, you know, like, it'll get better. Like, I know it's probably super tough right now. It'll get better. You'll eventually, like, all of us have eventually gotten to a point where our closest circle of friends are very accepting of us. They're very open. We don't hide it around them. And I mean, you know, it takes a while to get there, but you do eventually get there as long as you just kind of keep your head up and keep moving. It'll get better.
Well, from my perspective, lead by example. Just take it all in and turn it into love, and just inspire, and show them that you're the bigger person. even if it hurts.
I think it's been a beautiful talk. I think my advice to young kids or young adults or old fogies going through what we go through, build a family. Get out there on your social media. It doesn't matter if your friends are from Buenos Aires or from Colorado or downtown Dayton, Ohio. If they're queer, you're probably your family. Get involved in things like pages like this one or your local LGBTQ centers. Find a family. Find people that are affirming for you so that all of these things can bounce off of something instead of just hit you. So, smash that like button. Smash that subscribe.
Well, I think that there were a lot of fair points made, first of all. You know, everybody's bound to have differing opinions on this. It's not a topic that everybody is bound to agree on. It's natural to have differing opinions here, and I think that there were really very strong points brought up all throughout this conversation. Personally, I think the most important part is not to shoulder the burden. It's not to take everything that everybody's saying to you in stride. I think the most important part personally is learning how to love yourself outside of other people's opinions of you.
The general idea is that a lot of trans violence studies have focused on the factors that make depression and suicidal ideation happen in young people. So they look at schools a lot, and a big thing that they notice is bullying, things that are often lumped together and called gender-based violence. Generally speaking, the more of those kinds of things that people endure, the more likely you are to have depression, to have higher levels of gender dysphoria, feelings of being an outsider, and more likely to commit suicide or to have feelings of suicide, which for our population size is much higher than in the broader population sizes.
So on that same note, there is potential that jokes like these are influencing. When we're young, we always go with whatever our parents are watching on TV, and sometimes that's not always the most healthy thing. As little kids, we would learn how to make jokes about people that were different. It's because of media that we took in. I'm not trying to police things that people are saying. You're free to say what you want, but I believe that there is a really large lack of mindfulness, especially amongst comedy and humor today.
There's a word for this. It's called media literacy. I think that people need to understand how to consume, absorb, ponder, and critically engage with instead of internalize and let harm sink in.
Agreed.
So it's not that that's anybody's fault. Of course, that's just the way that society goes.
Right. You can't make anybody feel a certain sort of way about something. People are going to feel how they're going to feel. We're human.
Right.
Everybody has a different way of coping. It's not always going to be so cut and dry. Sometimes it is, though, and I mean, way to go for people that do have the cut and dry ability. Like, that's awesome. It's great that that coping mechanism works for you. However, it's not always going to work for everybody. So, in my opinion, to suggest that there is a blanket fix for gender dysphoria or for not being comfortable with the fact that nobody will address you by your pronouns, or people making assumptions based on how you look, it can be really heavy. Not everybody's just going to be able to stomach it. It's unfair to assume that everybody would.
And it's okay to fall to pieces.
Absolutely. We are humans. Having emotions is natural. Even if you feel like you're being ridiculous, even if you feel like this mental or emotional outburst that you're having is the craziest thing on the planet, you're valid. Your feelings are valid because you feel them. It doesn't differ from that. I personally am really super, super thankful for everybody that came on. Like, they didn't have to do that. And it's really cool that everyone took time out of their day to come and have a discussion and talk with us. And even though I couldn't be present for the interview, I still love being a part of all of this. And I really wanted to thank all of them. Even though I couldn't meet you in person, it was awesome having you on. We're all out of tea, so it's time to wrap up.
Join us next time when we meet up with the Gatlin Dame group here in Ohio to talk about transgender support groups and local resources.
And you can join in on the conversation at our Discord server, link in the description below.
Thank you for joining the discussion.
If you like what we're doing here, consider visiting our Patreon at www.patreon.com/spillthetea.
Patreon's the place where you can help your favorite artists, activists, entertainers, or YouTubers build their content and spread their message.
Make sure to hit the subscribe button and bell icon below to be notified about upcoming episodes. Let's talk again soon.
The Duchess of Kirkcaldy, always smiling and arriving late for tea.